Oh, I guess you would have won, yes. All right, how many here understand fully the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and could give a talk at any time on it? Raise your hand. Okay, how many here have got an 8th grade education or better? Raise your hand. So my question is, how come all of you with 8th grade education or better cannot give a talk?
I went to public school.
Yeah. You went to public school. You went to public school before Common Core.
Yeah. Some of us aren't very good orators.
You don't need to be an orator to discuss or understand the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution. It is written in plain language. That's it. What your interpretation is probably the correct interpretation, because you're coming from a work environment. You're coming from an environment that's rich in history. Our history is 150 years of 13 colonies that didn't need a big government to help them get their job done. That's what it was. From Plymouth to the Ark and Dove, where my family came over, and we forgot Virginia, but those are, you know, Confederates and stuff. We don't want to talk about that. But all the different people that came here, it was 150 years before England really got to where they wanted to stamp down our rights. And by that time, we knew what to do. It's kind of like your kids. If they ask to go to a movie and you say you're going on a trip, you'll get back with them in 3 weeks, guess what? They're going to make their own decision. But back in the 1600s and the 1700s, it took about 3, 4, 5 months, depending on the winds, to get an answer. So we learned to do it ourselves, and from that came a Declaration of Independence. And from that came a revolution, that we don't need big government telling us what to do. We can handle our own affairs locally. That's the basis. That's why this republic will last forever if we work to make it last forever. It's in the DNA of this country. Okay? That's the background. Now, we ended up having a Declaration of Independence with 5 truths. And we all know the truths. All men are created equal. Men in that case were men and women. They were transgender, they were gay, they were straight, they were Catholic, Christian. All of that group was included in that phrase, all men. Endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Government gets their power from us. And finally, if we are abused enough by the government that we elect, it is our duty, it is our right to change the government to take care of our happiness and our safety, or our safety and happiness. Now, safety back then meant that everybody is equal under the law. Do you feel equal under the law today?
No.
Hell no.
No. We've lost so much freedom over the last few years, in fact, the last 100 years, in fact, since the whole experiment started, that we can't keep track of all the rules and regulations. And if you don't know what the rules and regulations are, you're not free. So we did an Articles of Confederation. Articles of Confederation was a basic getting together of 13 sovereign countries, and they decided to work together for external purposes, i.e. conduct a war. Of course, they kind of waited until almost the war was over before they ratified it, but besides that, that was the purpose. It's kind of like the EU. France is independent, Germany's independent, but they come together for mutual assistance, called a confederation. It wasn't working. A lot of it wasn't working. So Virginia and Maryland got together, a couple other states, and they went to an Annapolis Compact, and they wanted to talk about how do we trade across the Chesapeake Bay. They ended up going, you know, this problem is so diverse, it's so big, we need to go someplace else to see if we can ratify this. So they sent a letter back to the sitting Congress and to all the states saying, hey, next year we propose that we get together and we discuss all things necessary to make the Constitution basically work for our posterity. That was their call for a convention. They sent it to the states, they sent it to Congress. Congress then, it took a while, but in February of 1787, they said, hey, go ahead, send people to it. This is a good idea, to amend, to fix, to whatever this government. Now again, it was the states doing it. Why was it the states? It was the states because they were the sovereign power. Okay? They had a framework that they lived in called a confederation, but they were the sovereign power. They talked at a convention. They talked about everything. A lot of the Articles of Confederation remained. But a couple things changed. It wasn't the states anymore, it was the people. And they came up with an orderly way to work together. And they sent the report to the Congress, sitting under the Articles of Confederation, and they sent the report to all the states. The Congress at that time, if they had thought that this was a violation of everything sacred, they should have slammed it right there, but they didn't do that. They sent the recommendation that all the states hold conventions and proceed to ratify. Well, all the states did just that. And all except Rhode Island and North Carolina ratified, but as soon as they had decided to set this up and they started going, they were changing the process of ratification from 100%, which is required under international law when you have a confederacy, okay, because it is a treaty, all parties have to agree, to something that we're going to form a republic. And in fact, the beauty of this document was they formed 14 republics. You had the 13 republics that were called states, and you had the one republic that was called the United States of America. They kept the same name as the Articles of Confederation. Now, in this debate for the Constitutional Convention, the initial plan coming from Edmund Randolph was the Virginia plan, and he said, hey, at times you're going to have to amend it, and it's up to the states to have a convention to amend it. That's how it first went into the Committee of Style. Came back, Madison didn't really like that. He thought it should be more in control of Congress. And it got changed to Congress. See, this was really neat. In a convention, people talk. And in a convention, people share ideas. The United States of America, from starting in the 1600s up to present day, have had numerous state conventions, hundreds, talking about various aspects, various treaty lines between different states, this and that. They understand the process. Madison's idea was it was just the federal government, and finally, right before the close of the time, George Mason said words to the effect, hey, we have to have something in case the shit hits the fan. He didn't quite use those words, but that's what he meant to say. If the government gets so corrupt, there's nothing we can do to change the government. If we leave it in their hands to change it, it's not going to happen. So what they did was they adopted words. The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem necessary, that's the way we pass the majority of them, okay, shall propose amendments to the Constitution, or on the application of legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, then Congress, I'm putting the word in, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, in which in either case shall be valid in all intents and purposes as part of the Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states. They put a couple caveats in that you couldn't change the Constitution, and we couldn't kick out slavery right away because they were afraid that that would do a bunch of bad stuff. I wish they kind of had. We probably would have saved 700,000 lives. But
amen.
That's Article 5. There's two ways to do it. Congress can do it, and in fact they have. Now the 17th Amendment, which I hate, was started because the states, going through a progressive era, decided it would be better for the people to elect the senators. They got a locomotive going, and all of a sudden Congress goes, oh, let's make the 17th Amendment. The 22nd, which I think is a repeal of the booze law, which allows this lady behind the bar to get good tips. The 21st was the same thing. The states were going, hey, we're going to change this. This is crazy. And all of a sudden Congress went, boom. The threat alone of holding a constitutional convention was enough to get those two passed. Now, how many believe that the people in Washington are following the Constitution? Raise your hand. Okay. How many believe that the people in Washington believe that they are following the Constitution? Raise your hand.
I don't think so. No.
They believe it.
No, they don't. They know they're
going to. A
going
lot of them do. Because who renders the overall ruling on what's constitutional?
John Roberts.
John Roberts. And no matter what we might think, Sheila was telling me a story about you come right home. Well, on the way home, you can stop by the parlor and play a video game. You get caught if mother knows, and then the lawyer goes, oh, but you didn't say you couldn't stop coming right home. That's the game they play in Washington, D.C. Now, who believes that the Constitution was written knowing that it was going to be amended? Raise your hand. All right? Because it's a more perfect union. It was never created as the perfect union. They always evolve over, society would evolve over a period of time. Now, some of this evolution over 200 years I despise. The majority of it I like. But I don't like changing definitions because I tend to be an originalist. And I think we all know that when your mom says come straight home from school, that means you don't stop at your girlfriends, your boyfriends, you don't have a smoke in the neighbor's yard, and you don't play a video game, you come right home. Well, that's what the Constitution says. Now, what does a state convention do? An Article 5 Convention of the States. Yes, it does amend the Constitution. I don't like to call it a con-con because the purpose is not to change the whole, it's to amend the whole. There is a difference. But, okay, I'm not going to get hung up on whatever you want to call it. The purpose is to have people get together, people that hopefully we trust. I don't trust anybody in Beacon Hill. I don't think they would send anybody to it. If they did, it would be kind of interesting. But the purpose is to sit down and discuss things. What can be better? Do you believe that the state should have the right to overturn the Supreme Court by a supermajority? What do you think? How many believe that?
Absolutely.
Individually.
I believe that. I think that 5 people defining law as the only way it exists is wrong. I don't think our framers ever thought that. I don't think our framers ever realized that. Term limits, okay? Spending. All of these things are things to discuss. Now, what will come out of this convention? If 34 states call for a convention for a specific purpose, okay, like to limit federal power, whatever, it's so broad it's scary. But what's the option?
All right, Tom, can we wrap it up?
Okay, the option is going to 20 trillion in debt. The option is bigger bureaucracies. Nothing's going to stop it because as soon as we elect people, unless they're complete and total, just so much of their word, the power corrupts. We know that. This is an out for all of us to get behind and to support and come up with some changes. They might end up, in summary, they might come up with, say, 15 things that 34 states say go. It takes 38 states to ratify. They could come up with a couple that are so harebrained it's unbelievable. It takes 14 states to say no. That's how the process very much. Thank you very much.
Okay, I guess it's my turn then. And I'll just say that everything that I say is backed up. I've got samples here. Patrick nicely printed out some copies of handouts for me, and I can send a PDF package to anyone who drops me an email. So we all agree that the government's out of control. We all agree that it's been ignoring the limits that the Constitution placed on it for over 100 years, but we don't agree on how to remedy this problem and enforce those constitutional limits on the federal government. And I'm going to start off with 2 quotes. The first is from H.L. Mencken. For every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. And the second quote is from my amazing grandfather, Ugo Ugolini. If you want to do something fast, go a little slow, and then you won't have to do it again. So an Article 5 convention, it's also been called the Convention of the States or Constitutional Conventions. The various names are just semantics. They all stand for the same thing. A convention called under Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution. Now, Black's Law Dictionary defines a constitutional convention as a duly constituted assembly of delegates or representatives of the people of a state or nation for the purpose of framing, revising, or amending its constitution. So all those names work. In my opinion, an Article 5 convention is extremely dangerous, and it cannot be limited to amendments. Why is it dangerous? Because once it's seated, the delegates, however they're chosen, are the direct representatives of the people and have the sovereign power that each of us has, as stated in the Declaration of Independence, to alter or abolish and institute new government. This is not a myth. This is a fundamental right that predates and supersedes the Constitution, as all our inherent rights do. They predate the Constitution, they supersede the Constitution. So any and all talk of how a convention could be limited only to proposing amendments is naive, erroneous, or deceptive, as are statements that a convention that proposed a new constitution would violate numerous federal and state laws, which I've seen in writings by supposed law professors. Remember that the one and only convention yet called was for the sole and express purpose of revising the Articles of Confederation of Congress according to the Journals of Congress, where the call was published. And yet that convention in 1787 was the source of today's Constitution. They tossed out the Articles of Confederation. So, Professor Nadelson, law professor, talks about promises about customs from other conventions that were held all the time in the founding era. This is completely disingenuous. The conventions that he references were state conventions and conventions on commerce and other topics. They were not called under Article 5, so there is no precedent, and his claim is specious. So, the Convention of States people say that the states are in charge, so everything's okay. But they're wrong. The Convention of States says a Convention of States is called by the state legislatures that they are given power to do so under Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution. No. Article 5 says that Congress, on application of the legislatures, the same thing that Tom read, of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments. So Congress calls the convention. And Article 1, Section 8, the last clause, gives Congress the power necessary and proper to carry out its duty to call the convention. So Congress calls the convention. Congress has the power to make all the rules regarding the convention that they have then been authorized to call. But wouldn't the delegates be good, honorable people who limit themselves to the jobs they were called to do, right? No. Congress, there's no limitation. Congress could appoint themselves as the delegates. Or the states, maybe the states will choose people, but then who are they going to send? Where's today's Washington? Where's Hamilton? Where's Madison? Where's Ben Franklin? Nowhere. We're going to get the cronies and the nephits of the corrupt, ignorant people in the state legislatures. So who would Massachusetts pick? Barney Frank? Bob Patrick? Former Speaker DeLeo if they let him out of jail? Yep. So what about California? Who are they going to pick? New York? Connecticut? I think who's going to get sent to this? It's not going to be Washington and Madison, today's version. So even if somehow you could limit this convention to amendments only, why would a convention still not reign in the federal government? The problem is that the federal government usurps powers not granted and violates the Constitution. The federal government is given no power by the Constitution to limit personal ownership of firearms, but they impose all kinds of rules doing just that, usurping power they don't have. So let's pass an amendment stating really clearly that they shall not infringe the right of the people. We have one. And they ignore it. So they would obey a new amendment's why? As Hamilton said in Federalist number 16, it is the duty of the people to enforce the Constitution. The government's always going to try to outgrow its limits. We have fallen asleep on the job, and we are looking for a quick solution to a long-term problem, and those never work well. But don't the states have to ratify anything the convention proposes? Well, if a convention proposes amendments, then the answer is yes. But if a convention proposes an entirely new constitution, that would come with its own means of ratification. The Articles of Confederation required all 13 states unanimously to agree. The new constitution that they proposed, 9 of the 13 states changed to ratify. They changed the ratification procedure. Well, what other new constitution? Well, there's two, to my knowledge, already written, just waiting to be offered. One was written by the Ford and Rockefeller Foundations in the 1950s, and one was written by the Revolutionary Communist Party in 2010. The latter, the communist one, would be adopted by declaration of the new Socialist Republic of America. The first one, from the Ford and Rockefeller Foundations, would be voted on by a national referendum called by the president. The states would have no say, and in fact, they would be abolished under that new constitution. And of course, there would never be any vote fraud in that referendum called by the president. No. So who else wants a convention? I have an 8-page list, right over here, of organizations that endorse the call for an Article 5 convention. There are hundreds of socialist and fascist groups, including many funded by George Soros. Those groups would not endorse the call unless they thought they could advance their own agenda. We all know the down has long wanted to bring about the downfall of the United States. So, what did Chief Justice Burger, James Madison, and the Congressional Research Service say about a convention? Chief Justice Warren Burger said that in his opinion in a private letter, there is no effective way to limit or muzzle the actions of a constitutional convention. Congress might try to limit the convention, but there is no way to assure that the convention would obey. After a convention is convened, it will be too late to stop the convention if we don't like its agenda. Madison said about the thought of a second convention, I should tremble for the result of a second. And the Congressional Research Service report from last March, I have a copy, there it is. The question of what sort of convention is not likely to be resolved unless or until a convention assembles. Or in other words, we'll have to get a convention in order to know how a convention operates. Yeah. So progressives have been pushing for an Article 5 convention in various names for over 50 years. They're hoping to use that format to get rid of our Constitution and impose a new Constitution on us. Are you willing to risk your freedom and the freedom of your children on whether or not a convention can be limited? So what do? Well, we don't hold the convention. Nullification is the remedy that the framers envisioned. And we just did it here in Massachusetts. Just last election cycle with the medical marijuana. And another dozen states have done it as well. Nullification. So we also go a little slow. And we take the long road, the hard road, but the only road that will succeed in the end. We have to learn the Constitution. Teach your children, teach your friends why the federal government's powers were limited by the Constitution and how that makes life better for everyone. We have to retake our country from the ground up, starting with ourselves, our towns, counties, states, and then we will see change in Washington. Until then, the best we can do is fight a holding action to prevent further degradation. But until we, the people, once again understand the Constitution, because Alexis de Tocqueville wrote about people in pubs discussing the nuances of the Constitution in the early mid-1800s. People used to talk about it all the time and have great discussions. They understood, and so the leaders that they elected were people who also understood the Constitution, because otherwise they didn't get elected again. Until we understand the Constitution as a citizenry, we have no chance to reign in the federal government because it is our duty to enforce the Constitution. We can't do it if we don't know it.
Allow a little bit of back and forth, so I don't know if you want to ask questions of each other, or Tom, if you want to make a countervening statement, and then Catherine can do the same, and then we'll, or if you want to talk, if you want to question each other on specific points. So I'll let this kind of be free for all a little bit, not too much. But Tom, if you wanted to ask a question or two, or just make a statement or counterpoint some of those points.
Well, there's a lot of terms going back and forth. I believe Article 5 was put in because the framers, the founders understood what a convention of the states was. Madison, when he was talking, was if we don't do the Bill of Rights, the states are going to come together and they're going to say we need a new constitution, put in the Bill of Rights. So by God, we better get off our butt and do it. And so he petitioned the states, got hundreds and hundreds of examples, summarized them, came up with, I forget the number, 35 or whatever, 12 passed. They went for ratification to the states, a process we can't leave out. Even the Constitutional Convention was ratified by the states when they called for ratification. They didn't call if it was going to be, if they didn't call if they were going to accept it, but they set up the groundwork for people to appoint commissioners to go and discuss whether or not they should ratify the Constitution. North Carolina held out until it became obvious that the Bill of Rights was going to be made. Now I look at where we are today. We can go banter back and forth. Nullification was tried. I think we lost 700,000 people. I don't know how we get everybody to nullify all of the things that are unconstitutional. That's very difficult. There's so many. I mean, what is it, 100,000 pages that need to be nullified? How do you do that? And how do we make sure that everybody does it so some of us don't go to jail before other people? The only way is what George Mason said, when the whole society gets so corrupt. This is the only thing. Do I trust California? No, except they did give us Reagan. Okay, forget that. All right, do I trust the people from Massachusetts? No, but do I trust South Carolina and North Carolina and Texas and Alabama and some of those? Yes. Do I believe there are 14 states that will come up under a convention? Yes. Now, as far as Article 1, Section 8, the framers knew what they were talking about. They had a 2-day debate on that article, because Governor Morris, when he was writing it up, put a semicolon in instead of a comma. Then the semicolon was you can raise as much money as you want in taxes, and then the new sentence, you can pay bills. The comma said you had to do both. They had a 2-day discussion. They knew what they were talking about when they put down the articles. So my question is, how do we fix something? We're kind of running out of time. And Article 5, Convention of the States, is going to take 5-7 years. That's going to be a lot of publicity, a lot of talk, a lot of things are going to get said, some good, some bad, but it's an educational process. It's moving forward under the guise of the Constitution as authorized. Everybody says, why would Washington listen to us? I don't know. But it's better in a revolution. Because if we go to nullification, that's basically what we're getting. They tried that once. It didn't work.
Actually, it's been tried in many states and very successfully.
It has. It's been tried. And
frankly, the nullification that you're referring to, the Civil War, that was a failure of Congress to eliminate slavery, and in fact the expansion of slavery was never a power allocated to the federal government. So all of those laws that they passed from 1808 until the Civil War started expanding slavery was a usurpation of power not granted by itself.
That's right. And the Supreme Court, Justice Taney, said it was legal. And that's the problem. And that's why we need to have this, because states should have a right that if 3/4 of the states or 66% of the states say Obamacare is wrong, it's wrong.
But
period.
The states have that right. It is called nullification.
The word nullification is not in this document. I've read it a bunch of times.
The word nullification is not in that document.
But Article 5, Convention of the States is.
As you said, this is a confederation of dual sovereignty. We have
it's no longer a confederation of dual sovereignty.
Actually,
it's a republic.
It
is a republic, and we're guaranteed 50 republics plus the national republic. It's not a confederation anymore.
There is still dual sovereignty. The states have sovereignty within their borders. The federal government was given power.
They don't anymore.
Well, the states are complicit. They have sold us out for federal money.
They've sold us out to get their money back.
Hang on, Tom.
Well, if they just didn't send it in the first place. But the states now get 1/3 of their money
Good hammer, Tom.
from the federal government. They have sold us out because it gives them an illusion of more power, more control, growing government, and this is another example of how we the people, because we don't know the Constitution, have fallen down on the job and we've let the states get away with it. However, to go back to nullification, nullification as a term does exist in Madison's other writings, not within the body of the Constitution itself, but it has been used by many states over many instances. Medical marijuana is only the recent example. The national ID card that Bush tried to push in the early 2000s after 9/11, the states functionally nullified that by basically saying, we're not playing that game. We will not comply. That is what nullification is. When the federal government usurps power and passes a law that is beyond the scope of power they were given by the Constitution, which created the federal government. It didn't create the state governments, it created the federal government. It is the duty of the states to say, you do not have the power under the Constitution to do that. We're not playing your game. Now you had a concept?
Just Arizona tried to enforce border.
Selma, Alabama.
They got sued by
Little Rock,
Well,
Arkansas.
and here's an example of how far we've come from understanding the Constitution. The federal government brought suit against Arizona for the crime of enforcing federal regulations that the feds weren't enforcing, right? They sued in Arizona court. In Article 3, it says, in all cases in which a state shall be party, the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction, and not one of them, not the judge, not the Arizona lawyers, not the federal lawyers, were able to say, wait a minute, we're in the wrong court. Stood up and said, those lawyers should have stood up and said, Judge, I move to dismiss the under Article 3, you do not have jurisdiction to hear this case. And the judge would have no recourse except to say, case dismissed.
Okay.
That's how far we have deteriorated, but that's not a flaw in the Constitution. That's a flaw in us.
Is there any reason at all to ever amend the Constitution?
Of course there is.
Really? How do we do that when we have a corrupt body that is not going to decrease their power? How do you do that? How do you amend the Constitution if you've got a corrupt... Hal's must have corrupt her on this answer. Go ahead. How do you do that? What do we do? Because I'm of the opinion, number one, I don't like when you say that we get our money from the federal government. They don't. They get their money out of my wallet.
They think
okay?
they get their
And they
money.
print the money.
No, they know where they're... We need to correct people. They get it from my wallet and everybody else that works' wallet.
Some states pay more than
That's where
others.
the money comes from. But
And a bunch of it stays in D.C. in various pockets.
most of it stays in D.C., but that's besides the point. We are at a threshold now with 18 trillion going on 19 where I can look at my young grandkids and I can go, you're screwed. Period. That's it. We can sit around and we can nullify, we can try to get states together. We need to have conventions to talk about nullification. We better do something. If you don't get all 50 states acting in cohort, then you're going to have Selma, Alabama, you're going to have Little Rock, Arkansas,
That
you're going
hasn't
to have
happened with
Phoenix, you're
medical
going to have
marijuana, has it? And that's only been 13.
I don't
Can I
really
ask you
care
a
about
question?
medical marijuana.
What
I
does
care
medical
about...
marijuana have to do with the frickin' Constitution?
It's an example of nullification in action, even here in liberal
I'd like
Massachusetts.
to
Explain
That's
that
all.
to me.
I'd like
What?
this...
Explain it to me.
Could you explain nullification more? What that
Controlled substance.
Nullification is when a state says, federal government, you have usurped power, you have no right to make rules in this area. The Constitution does not give you the power to do that. So within the borders of our state, we are saying, go play someplace else. We are not complying with this regulation or this law that you had no power to pass in the first place.
From a beyond like social issues like gay marriage and things like that are playing out. From a practical perspective, from limiting the leviathan size of the federal government, the fraud, waste, and abuse at the epic levels, unimaginable levels, has there been any example of nullification that has actually cut the size or stayed the same the size of the federal government or level the size of the federal government? That's kind of the issue at hand. The social issue I think will come and go.
and the Supreme Court squashed that. In other words, your point is right. States tried to implement term limits on their respective centers.
On their respective centers, right. In the past, in quite a few.
The Supreme Court said they couldn't do it.
So I think we're peeling this back to the fundamental issues that are
In the Article
plaguing
1, Section 1.
the generations to come, which is the 100+ trillion of unfunded liabilities,
Yeah.
the federal debt spiraling out of control in front of our eyes. To me, unless you find a solution to that problem, everything else is a wash. All the other social issues, gay marriage and blah, 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 and free contraception and even Obamacare is a wash. So how do you address that one top issue?
Can we just go back to nullification for a moment? What teeth does nullification have? Captain, you talk as though it has teeth, and this gentleman's suggesting that it doesn't have any teeth. I guess.
Well,
General
it does have teeth if we have states that have the gumption to nullify and to stick by it. For example, Colorado passed a law before the Democrats all took over. They passed a law saying any federal tax money has to go through a central account here in Colorado before it goes off to the federal government. They've never implemented it. But if they implemented that, then anytime the feds then try to turn around and punish them for non-compliance by saying, well, we'll withhold your federal highway money, then the Colorado can then say, well, we're not sending it to you in the first place.
But is that nullification?
That is nullification.
But see, how does
That
that,
is
change?
non-compliance, and that is refusal.
How does that change how the federal government works with the other 49 states? Hurrah for Colorado. Hurrah for Massachusetts that you can get any doctor to say it's okay to smoke pot. We gotta love Massachusetts. But so what? How does that fix the problem that our grandkids, the debt, the size, the number of regulations that come out every day, the fact that the Supreme Court comes and rules on a 5-4, 5 people, God bless them, they get great dinners and stuff, and they now dictate to 325 million people what the heck they're going to do.
Well, see, there's an error. Nowhere in the
How do you fix
Constitution,
it?
nowhere in the Constitution
It doesn't matter.
does it say that the Supreme Court is the sole arbiter
Yes.
of
Yes,
what
it
the
does.
Constitution.
It
No,
started,
it does not.
if you read the
No.
Federalist Papers, as
She's
much
right,
as-
she's
No,
right.
no, no. It was from the Marbury v. 1803 in 1803, where the first question they had to solve was they had not, what they had been asked to rule on was a constitutional decision where they had jurisdiction. And that's where it all came from. There is no place in Article 3 does it say that the Supreme Court is the sole and final arbiter. That's
So
nuts.
how
The
do
federal
you- how
government
do you-
is created by the Constitution.
Why else does
So,
everybody else have
the-
to swear oaths?
The federal government, a branch of the federal government, has no standing to decide on the terms that create it.
That's fine, but still, it
And
doesn't
if we
solve
know-
it doesn't solve the problem.
It doesn't.
That the
It isn't a
Supreme
magic wand
Court.
to solve the problem. What solves
Yes,
the
it
problem
is.
is
If
when
you
the
get, if you
people
do,
understand.
if you do, the people can understand all they want, but they're still going to go to jail if they disobey what the Supreme Court says. Okay? You can say maybe they won't. We can have nullification, but you're just
That's
going
at
to
a
get a
state
lot of
level,
people.
not an individual level.
At the state,
Nullification is at
that's
the
fine.
state level.
They can do all sorts of stuff. I'm saying the only way to fix it is we know that this has been abused, and so the fix is if you get 66 or 34 of the states that say this Supreme Court ruling is wrong, then by the Constitution of the United States, it is no longer the highest land.
I would actually possibly support that amendment after careful review of the verbiage. But again, I have 8 pages here of socialist and fascist organizations
Am I on
that
that
are
page?
all. I checked very carefully.
Okay, and it's show ID to vote right there. So what? We've had communists and everything as part of this country from the beginning.
But they are pushing for a constitutional convention because they want to destroy
Okay.
the Constitution.
Well, and to be clear, and to state clearly, the people in this room are of goodwill. They want to solve problems in
These
America.
folks aren't.
What?
So
I understand, but I'm just saying the people
the
in this
majority of
room
the Democrats
are of goodwill and are looking
Aren't
and
wanting
we're
to
trying to
solve
figure
this
out how to
either.
fix the problems, and we're that's why we're having this discussion. I just had a question. Actually, I thought of this. Is the infringement upon the Second Amendment, is that nullification?
I'm sorry, what?
The infringement on the Second Amendment, gun laws,
Yes.
is that nullification by the states?
The states should nullify, and some of the states.
Well, they're state gun laws.
There are state gun laws, and frankly, those are unconstitutional as well.
But
because
are they an
Article
example of
6
nullification?
They couldn't do it without the feds.
I just asked.
Passed, amendment which was passed allows the federal government to determine fair and equal treatment.
No,
That's
no.
one of the provisions then.
If we read the 14th Amendment, it wasn't to apply to today. That the 14th
Oh, no,
Amendment
I'm
could
not arguing
basically
that point. The point is
14th
it's
Amendment could
fair,
be a
it's fair, and it is
Got
being
rid of.
applied. If they didn't want it, they put an expiration date on it. They didn't do it.
well, it was for the
Consequently, that is still with us. And by the way, you're all missing the point. The point is the idiots that we vote for that are doing all this will just be replaced by another bunch of idiots. And if you want to know the source of the problem, I found out 2 months ago. I meet once a month with my old college buddies. And one of them is a retired school teacher. And he, quite frankly, said something that was frightening. He says, you, me, because he knows my politics, lost when 40 some odd years ago, we decided to take over the schools.
yeah.
And now, reverse us, you're going to have to double that time. And you know something? He's right.
Yes.
Yeah, you talk about who knows the Constitution today? The good nuns made me write it out longhand about 200 times.
Unless they're
Not for
Jesuits,
academic
and then they do
purposes,
social
but because it disagreed on definitions of my behavior at the time. By the time I got into the 8th grade, I could write it without opening the book.
What I will tell you is that if you do talk to kids, especially teenagers who are feeling a little bit of,
Yep.
pushing against authority, you can get to them very easily by saying, they'll be griping about something. Oh, don't you just hate it when that teacher tells you you have to do this? And don't you just hate it when your mom says you can't go to the mall because you have to go? Yeah. So you really hate it when people tell you what to do, right? Yeah. So why do you want to let the government tell you what to do?
What are we all? Are we all?
Good.
You know,
Now,
it
if you
starts
became
with
a
thinking.
teacher, you could
What
say
are we,
that to
anarchists
20
now?
kids.
I'm trying to spread that message to every classroom.
No,
I can
I'm
get
not
to.
disagreeing. That's a good message. But we lost that battle over 40 years ago, apparently.
I don't think teaching kids that you can disrespect or disobey the law is a good social
I
norm.
didn't say that I was telling them to disregard the law or to disobey the law. I'm getting them with they don't like being told what to do.
Nobody
and
likes
the
it.
government is telling them more and more what to do. Do you like that?
So let's
Should you
have
think
an
about
Article
it?
5 convention and amend it
It's
so
basically
that the
saying-
government
it's
will not.
basically saying, think of and not just be like, oh, Nick, and be like, oh, this is the law and it should be followed. It's like saying, is this law doing good? Is this legal for the Constitution?
As long as a court defines something as legal, you have to go back and make the restrictions on the court bigger. You have to.
Can I throw something about the Gruber comment about the stupidity of American?
Yes.
I would be somewhat enthusiastic about your position on nullification if and only if the average American person was well informed and could rally behind their state to get something done at the state level. Because the average American is completely uninformed. I mean, 60–70% of Americans have no earthly idea what's going on to them. They're the consent of the victim, the sanction of the victim. They're absolutely blind about what's going on in their federal government. I have to side with the
But you
convention
see,
states.
I take everything you say and say that is one of the factors that makes an Article 5 convention so
Dangerous.
very dangerous.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
The American Revolution had less than 30% of Americans wanted independence.
That's a myth.
30%
That's a myth.
thought, and 40% didn't really care.
That's a myth.
I've read it in about
Because
10 different places.
This gentleman has a question over here.
Right, right. Say we go into this convention, okay? 2 years down the road, we find out it's corrupt as our government is right now. What's our recourse? What do we do then?
There is none.
The recourse is that 14 states vote no on the amendment.
If they
What
propose
if they're so
amendments.
corrupted?
The purpose of it, when you call it is, you can use the word constitutional convention all you want, but it's not. The Constitution calls it an Article 5 Constitution or Convention of the States to amend the Constitution. Amending, yes, it changes if you want to do Black's Law, but again, Black wrote that definition at the height of the progressive movement in 1895. So I'm going to go with Joseph's story.
Now, we start off with the convention.
Yeah.
The way you outlined it, right? And we're going to have 5 ideas that are going to become
Right.
part of this convention.
Right?
2
5 ideas, you might have 2, you might have 10.
saying 2 years, and I'm saying 2 years in, it's going bad, and it's going to take freedoms away, and it's going to ruin this
Any faster
beautiful
than
country of
today?
ours.
Any faster than today?
I'll take the risk.
I'm just saying, we get into it, what's the recourse? What's to stop that train?
14 votes. Because it's not, if they have 2 or 10 or 20, each one is voted on separately. So the recourse is 14 votes. We can sit back and we can worry about that, or we can try nullification, we can try all these other things, but until we actively educate the public and get a group of activists to go, fine. Do I expect Massachusetts? No. I would think, though, that Massachusetts, we have a lot of representatives and senators that look really good with their pictures oil painted in Washington. They might actually want to have term limits. Okay? There are some common ground thing, and if 25 states actually came up and put in the same package in front of Congress, and now they're in 30 states got there, and they're so close, they've got 30 states. You don't think Congress is going to try to do something to keep their power? I think they would. I think it scares the living bejeebies out of them.
But we can also, our amendments, have our congressperson bring them to the floor and put pressure on the legisvermin to pass those amendments and send them to the states. That is another alternative that we do have. We've had some hands up
yeah,
over
well,
for a while.
I assume we're in the...
Behind you was first.
Well, I was just a little bit murky about how delegates to a convention would be.
It's up to the state.
Except that Congress has all necessary power,
That's
so
right.
they
To
could
call the place and the time of the convention. That
it
is
is not
the limit.
limited to calling the place and the time. No, if you parse the grammar out very carefully, they are not
The
limited.
states elect the delegates.
That is what is purported. That is not necessarily the case. There actually is no limitation on what Congress can do. Congress
Just
can
like
tell.
today. Wow. Just like
So
today.
if Massachusetts sends its congressional delegation and delegates, and what if Congress could say, we're going to be the delegates to this constitutional convention? Wouldn't that be horrible? All right.
It would be horrible, but it's not the way it's been over the course of history.
I'm going to try and make 2
on this
succinct
country.
questions, and
Okay.
there's no necessarily right or wrong. I wanted to go back to something that Tom had said, which I had been thinking about, which is that, in fact, although Article 5 has never been used to amend the Constitution, the process has been evoked to spur Congress into acting. There are a number of amendments that were done to basically to cut off an Article 5 process. And the second question is, I'm a little unclear. Are you saying that a constitutional convention can throw out everything? The Constitutional Convention could decree a communist state and then create a process where it was ratified. Is that a constitutional convention that free?
The convention of states people would, and the move to amend people will say no, that it cannot, and they will cite precedent that frankly, in my opinion, does not apply. However, in the opinion of former Chief Justice Berger, in the opinion of James Madison, in the opinion of several state Supreme Courts, delegates to a convention would bring with them the inherent right to alter or abolish and institute new government. That is an inherent fundamental right, as put in the Declaration of Independence, that predates and supersedes our Constitution. And under that right, they could propose a completely new Constitution. Could they impose it?
It would have to be
Could they
ratified.
impose it? No, there would be some sort of ratification procedure.
Okay, hold on just a minute. That's kind of the very crux of this situation, because I think there's a lot of people who are passionate about everything. We do want to fix our country. And I mean, I think that is the question to Tom, essentially, is when this was happened in the past, what were the precedents that were sent in, if there were any, as far as the convention itself? And the question really that's out there is, how does it stop from being a runaway convention?
Well, the runaway convention is 14 votes, and I would also point out everything that Catherine's saying is happening today. Hey, we've reached a point where I don't recognize the country that I swore allegiance to upholding back in '74. I've got no idea what happened to it, but it's different. So if we do it quickly, at least we know where we're at. If indeed you're right and I'm wrong, and we have a constitution, at least we'll know. The pain will be over. But today, all it's doing is getting worse. Well, it's what? Yes, we have the right under the Declaration.
On an amendment by amendment, let's say there's 6 amendments voted on. Each amendment gets voted on.
Gets voted on by itself.
So if there's wacko amendment number 1 to restrict the First Amendment rights of all
She's
citizens,
implying they won't follow that
I
process.
never denied that if they end up proposing amendments and not substituting an entire.
She's implying they won't follow that
But like I
process,
said,
that
the
they'll
purpose,
just
how you call
write a
it-
new constitution, and so the amendment issue will be
According to
moved.
Supreme Court rulings, and John can, Supreme Court and Circuit Court judges and this and that, when you have a convention of the states, and there have been many in recent and in past years and stuff, if you go outside the agenda, it's null and void, and they will hold that it's null and void, and they've done that before.
There's only been one.
There's only been one.
Okay.
All right, for the sole and express purpose of proposing
So,
amendments to the Articles of
If
Confederation.
indeed
Isn't
you
it time
think
for us
that,
to-
if indeed you think that Constitution is illegitimate, why do you protect it so much?
I did not say it was illegitimate. I
You
said it
it-
replaced.
but that was the purpose of it. Who was in charge of
Because they
replacing it? The
used-
states or the federal government
No.
as dictated in the
You
Confederation
see,
of the
they
Republic?
exercised their right, as listed in the Declaration of Independence, to alter, abolish, or institute
The
new government.
states did that. The states called the convention the thing that works. We need something that works because this isn't working.
Okay.
Congress agreed. Congress said, go ahead. Congress had one final point.
We had those statements to be able to stand up for the Constitution as it was and write it the way that they needed to write it. Because
Well, they
it
did.
made it our president for our country. Right now, she's right with that list and with the fact that we have lobbyists that can go into that convention and take it over. That's where we would.
But it's happening now.
And the only way
Anyway,
to be able to protect our country is to be able to educate and activate as many people as we can, so that we can put the right people into office to get the bad ones out.
Actually, the problem is
And
not
that-
the Constitution. It's the problem that people aren't following it.
Which we
And
all
we
agree
elect
on.
those
Which we
for
all
all.
agree on.
But until you change
You
the
can
fact
make
that
any
the
document
Supreme
you
Court,
want.
yes,
In time, you're gonna ignore that too.
until you make it where the Supreme Court can be overturned by the states, from which they get their lawful duty, until you can overturn some of their rulings by states. If you want to call it nullification, I don't call it nullification. Until they can vote and say no and make nullification fine, form of nullification now, but right now,
Up until the
nullification
Tenth
would not
Amendment,
hold.
they technically could.
Okay. I think, you know, this is some great discussion. We'll return back to it. I did want to have the opportunity to have
I need some
our other.
water.
Okay. Yeah. Can we get some more water? Okay. I'm sorry.
1 hour. You want to take a break?
No. Do people want to take a break, or how are people feeling?
I got a flight at 5, I don't care, in the morning.
Okay. No, we'll continue. We'll continue on, but going to Tom's points, it's I think the biggest question is, how does it stop from being a runaway? And I think that's part of the process is all about, which I really want to understand about how that's going to work. So, not picking sides, but Tom had gone first. I'll have John Locke come up, tell me what your position is as far as, what you're involved in the organization and how this is going to work, and how it could be worked, if that is possible. Sure, yes.
Sure, so I don't have,
Introduce yourself and who and what you are.
my name's John Locke, and like a lot of you, I became, sure, my name's John Locke. Like a lot of you, I became politically involved, more recently than others, so I know Hal's been in the Umbrage Society since the 80s. I don't have that kind of history. I actually got involved getting some signatures for Mike Stoko's congressional run. I saw him come in here a little bit ago. So that was my start, and I heard about the Convention of States. I'm hungry for a solution of how to bench back against the federal government like everyone here. So I got very interested in it. I threw my hat in the ring for a state representative in my district against someone who wasn't going to have an opponent otherwise. I got somebody on the ballot there, and I talked to a lot of people about the convention of states. I knocked on a lot of doors, a lot of people on the Democrat side too, on term limits. So there's a lot of bipartisan amendments that would really rein things in. And since I did not win against the incumbent Democrat in my district of Melrose and Wakefield, unfortunately, it wasn't totally unexpected, but I have volunteered to be one of the 3 kind of leadership roles for this Convention of States project in Massachusetts. So I'm the coalitions director in Massachusetts, and that's just to answer questions and things like that. But you know, this list of all these other groups who want an Article 5, it's true, we are not the 5, but it's an Article 5, but it's not the same Article 5 application that those groups are going for. She mentioned the, what's the Wolfpack one on media, or the...
St. Yeager and the Young Turks of Wolfpack.
Yeah, I forget the name of that one, but they want to overturn Citizens United. They want to overturn Citizens United. They have 3 states that have signed up for an application to call an Article 5 to overturn Citizens United. We have 3 states that have signed up for the Liberty Amendments Convention of States application. These are separate applications. These are not the same. You know, Congress has proposed many amendments. They aren't all the same. So we should distinguish between the different focuses and the different scopes of those. I know Catherine referenced the Declaration of Independence in terms of overturning a constitution, writing a new one, and that's where that power would come from. It wouldn't come from Article 5. Article 5 is about amending the Constitution. 2/3 of Congress can do it, 2/3 of the states can propose amendments, and that's where it comes from. But I wanted to just kind of point out that we had a really big election in 2014. We gave historic balance of the Congress, GOP and Congress, but we also gave historic balance of power to the state legislatures, to the GOP. So across the country there are 98 state house and state senate chambers. There's 98 because Nebraska has 1 chamber that's nonpartisan, so it doesn't count. There's 98 chambers in the country, and the GOP controls 68 of those. And that's up from 57 after 2014. There's a lot. This is where our strength is, and I think we're crazy to pass up this opportunity. 31 states have total GOP control of both of their houses in their state legislature. So, and despite that, the liberals are putting forth amendment or Article 5 applications to overturn Citizens United. They never give up. But we just talk about why we can't do Article 5. We talk about why we can't do impeachment. We talk about why we can't do the power of the purse. So the folks on the opposition side of the Liberty Amendments Convention of States prevail. I'm really worried that the people who stay home, who don't think that their vote matters, will be further justified in that. What I'd like to see, because I was out there on the partial, because I was out there on the campaign trail for state legislature, I'd like people to become more aware of what the state legislators can do on the national level where they really feel the pain, and I'd like them to get out there and vote for representatives and state senators, because it doesn't take very many votes to swing those elections, and I think you could see change happening very, very quickly at the state level and at the national level if that were the case. Because people don't care at all who their state representative is, hardly anybody knows who their state representative is, and a lot of them went to that box on the ballot. If they knew what was behind that office, I think that we could actually make a lot of inroads.
Okay, John, I said you two would have like 3 to 4 minutes each, but I'd like you to, I guess part of the process here is, what is the process? So, yeah. I guess just to clarify, I'm going to give Hal a little bit of added time as well, because I think that's kind of the process. Yeah. You talked about calling for a convention of the states on specific amendments. Yeah. What is that? Okay, so how is that limitation?
Yeah, so Article 5 is how to amend the Constitution, Congress and the states. Congress, there's been 10,000 proposed amendments placed before Congress. Obviously, only about 1% of them make it to state ratification, and not all of them make that. There's been 350 applications by the states on Article 5 convention, so it's not a rare thing. They've happened many times even in the past decade. But the reason a convention of states has not yet occurred is because the scopes of their applications have not matched. There's only 3 that match for this liberty and amendment scope, and when that hits 34, then a convention of states is called, time and place, not rules and everything else, by Congress for that to occur. The states are already meeting. It's called an assembly of legislators, and they're meeting about the rules and things like that. They've decided that they don't care how many representatives come from each state, but every state gets one vote. These are rules that are kind of in line with what's happened in previous conventions way back. And so the reason why the scope of that application matters is really right there in front of you is that 350 applications are already there. If the scope didn't matter, you could have a convention. 49 out of 50 states have submitted an application on some topic or other at some point in time.
Okay, so I think that's good clarification, but to kind of crystallize it, and your over to Hal, your supposition is that, or your statement is that for a constitutional convention to be called, to get to that 2/3 portion, that the applications have to be identical.
Correct.
So that they get to be focused and saying they're going to pass the Liberty Amendments, whatever, 10, 12, whatever that function is. For the Citizens United one, there has to be 34 states proposing repeal of Citizens United or repeal of the First Amendment, etc. So, but at this point, there's only 3, so it sounds like there's not much danger there.
On the Citizens United?
Well, on either right now. I mean, it sounds like it's a high hurdle, and I guess that's.
It is a very high hurdle, and also on the Citizens United, especially, they would need 3/4 of the states that have 68 out of 98.
So then you have a Herculean task. It sounds like.
Sure.
Okay. So
lesser Herculean than if we had fewer than 31 states in total GOP control. It'll be interesting to see what comes of the next 2 years.
Okay, no, that's good. Okay.
There's a lot of just learning about this.
Just very quickly, is there anything else you want to add to what we've been saying?
Yes.
I'd like to turn it over to Hal on equal time. Fair on equal time.
Really quickly on nullification, I mean, medical marijuana. So we passed medical marijuana. It's only working because President Obama doesn't enforce what he doesn't want to enforce. The next president comes in, it's Huckabee. There's no more medical marijuana because it's still a federal law, and all the banks and everything else can't deal with it. Then I think that what really works that we nullify, maybe we feel like we did it, but it's what the federal government chooses not to enforce at certain points in time, and it really depends on the next administration.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay.
Completely corrupt from the ground up, they get taken over, and then
at
there's
the
people that
state
know how to
level,
make them.
At the state level, I think it's fantastic. I'm a total nobody in my district who ended up on the ballot. It wasn't that hard. It took 150 signatures from around my neighborhood. So I do think that there is a lot of liberty at the state grassroots level, and it percolates up from
The convention process.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, John. Next we'll have Hal Shurtleff. I mean, basically what we're... Okay.
Yeah, so I just work in the private sector. I actually help make some of the black and white displays in your Kindles and e-readers and things like that. I volunteer for the Convention of States project, so it's a volunteer role to kind of build coalitions, that's all.
Okay, so...
Thank you for my Kindle.
So, again, we're talking about the process, and, we all here want to solve the problems in our country. So it sounds like it's a high hurdle, but Hal, I'm sure you have something to say about that and your concerns, because you're sounding the alarm that, we're getting close to a dangerous number here. So if you'd like to introduce yourself and talk about...
I think these two did a wonderful job.
Yes.
For each Article 5 does not restrict a convention to specific topics, even though some of the applications may be for balanced budget, or in school, or what have you. So it's all to Congress, though. That's the key. Congress can tomorrow say we have enough applications. Right now, it looks like 23 states have some sort of live applications, mostly for balanced budget. But
Congress, according to that congressional report that you cited, they're the ones that determine, okay? And Congress, on three occasions, tried to pass laws guiding in Article 5, as late as 1979. Actually, I have a 1,300-page document. It passed the Senate in 79 and never passed the House. We were just about 2 states away from a convention at that point. So, I was at the September 2011 event at Harvard. How many people knew about that event? Just probably a few.
Well, actually, the video I posted from Glenn Reynolds talking about it, he was the keynote speaker there. I think he was pro-CONCOM, but he was also talking both sides that, you know,
Is this 2011?
Yeah,
Glenn Reynolds.
2011.
I remember reading about that.
Yeah,
Okay.
Party
There were groups on both sides. There's always been groups on both sides of the ecological spectrum, for and against. So, make that up front. People like Charlie Rice, Professor Charles Rice is Notre Dame, very conservative, and Warren Berger is quoted here as also Robert Bork. Robert Bork, who Mark Levin called the greatest eagle mind of his time, said that Congress may try to pass laws, but the delegates, as a sovereign body, can ignore them. And how are you going to enforce anything once that convention convenes? And they're lame duck, one time. Okay. The argument, it's a good argument. Well, 14 states won't do anything crazy, so maybe a bunch of them will, but we still have that. Well, 48 states adopted Common Core. Okay? 48 states, many of them with Republican majorities. Okay? All 50 states have adopted Agenda 21. We're up to our eyeballs here in this state, and it's awfully hard to get it. And you're doing a great job in Central Massachusetts, fighting it at the local level, nullifying it at the local level. Okay, but what do? They don't take the money. The states just don't take the money, and you just made a great case against one. In fact, I got an email from Mark Meckler, and he said there are over 2/3 of the states that have Republican majorities. Well, then what's the problem? Just don't take the money from the feds. Tell them to get lost. That's simple, folks. You don't need a convention. I do have a lot of items here on the table that are yours for the taking. I've got an article about left and right working together for an Article 5. I've got a critique of the book by Mark Levin on that subject. I got some DVDs. And this is one of the things that we're doing. What we're doing about it here in this region is we formed a camp called Camp Constitution. It's not just for kids. It's for adults, it's for whole families. And we have about 120 people, plus we videotape our program, so thousands of people get some great lessons on what to do about it. We have to educate. That is the key. Because you can have a lot of great people at this convention. There might be even some Liberty people at this convention. But how many George Washingtons will be there? Not too many, folks. How many Republicans believe in limited government? Today, not many in the House and the Senate, right? Not a whole lot. So that's the problem. And right here in Massachusetts, the last session, the Wolfpack group, that's the left-wing group sponsored by George Soros. They tried to get theirs passed, but it didn't go anywhere. It died in committee. I'm sure they're already popping up all over the country. So we're working to rescind all of these states' calls because we believe it's quite possible that Congress may decide, hey, we've got over 600 calls, we're just going to have to convention. So we're working to do a little maintenance program to rescind the calls. And in New Hampshire, we just got a resolution introduced, HCR 1, and we're working. In Massachusetts, by the way, I've got a resolution that will be proposed in the Senate and in the House to do that. If you're interested in helping me on it, please talk to me afterwards. And again, thank you for giving me the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody who wants copies of the documents that I have, my cards are out on the table. Send me an email. I have a PDF package, one document. Boom, you get everything annotated and all the rest.
Okay. Yeah.
I wanted to ask Mr. Weaver, is your intention, your hope that you would be limiting the Supreme Court? Is that the scope of your goal for this?
I think that's one of the discussions it has to be. The Supreme Court has the same DNA as I do, and they make mistakes just like we do, and we have to We have to. I don't believe that the framers and the founders believed that the Supreme Court was going to go as far as, because you and I both know what the rule. Obamacare is unconstitutional. We all know that.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just asking if that.
Yeah, that would be one. Term limits would be one. Budgets would be one. Presidential executive orders would be one. There's a lot of things that would limit the government, but right now the spending, the regulations, the bureaucracies, we can have all the elections we want, but until we get control of the bureaucracies, we're stuck with losing our country.
Okay, we'll turn it back over to questions in just a moment, but I'd like to actually propose a question myself. I mean, basically, or kind of have some clarification from both of you. Basically, the one contention is that for the Convention of the States, they'd actually be called, that it needs to be for very specific items, and that was what John was indicating, that you need to call it for this slate of amendments, that here's this slate of amendments from the Liberty Amendments, or here's the Citizen United, they want to repeal the First Amendment, God help us. That's how a Convention of the States is called. On the other hand, Hal's contention, and I think Catherine's as well, is that once there are calls for a convention of the states, that there's a call for a constitutional convention, that Congress can say, oh, I've got 34 states that are asking for this, I'm going to do it. Even though this one's asking for repealing the First Amendment, this dozen over here is doing that, and this dozen over here is trying to propose the Liberty Amendments. So I guess, again, I was open this up with saying, I want to talk about the process, because that's really, how do we limit it to being not, to become a runaway convention or not become a runaway convention. So I guess that's...
There's two pieces there. One is the call, and then one is the convention. The Congressional Research Service report does agree that the call has to be substantially identical. However, the Congressional Research Service, along with Justice Berger and state Supreme Courts, etc., say what has been called. So yes, they have to agree on the call. Once it's been called, that you cannot limit what they choose to discuss.
Okay, just again to clarify, to crystallize, once it's been called for a specific purpose, or just a dozen calls here and a dozen calls there?
Called for a specific purpose.
Okay.
Once they sit down and start to talk, they can talk about anything.
Okay, so at this point, as I think was indicated, there's only, you came up with two, there's three that have called for the Liberty Amendments, three that have called, sorry, 2.5 that have called for the repeal of Citizens United, or repeal of the First Amendment. So right now we're only at 3, and that sounds like it's pretty safe. But on the other hand, Hal was talking, there's 20 calls roughly for a balanced budget amendment. Okay, now, so I kind of interjected in there from Tom.
Well, we all go to meetings and you write an agenda, right? When people go to the meeting, you can talk about other things, but you make sure that you address the agenda, right?
Yes.
Not necessarily.
They didn't do it the first time.
Yeah, well, yes, they did do it the first time, but that's.
They came out with the Constitution. What happened to our Confederation?
It went in the trash heap of good ideas.
Why not bring it back? Why not bring it back?
I'm not even saying.
Okay.
I'm not even saying it was a good thing. It was a good thing to happen. But the stated purpose did not sustain it.
The stated purpose from the states was to put together a constitution for the posterity of the country. It had nothing to do with the Articles of Confederation and the treaties between the 13 colonies. The sovereignty came from the states. That's what made the republic. That's what made the federal constitution, not Congress. I read this as shall propose amendments to the Constitution, and I look at the way they use words, and I see the way they use words, and to me the applications have to be the same. In other words, there's an agenda. Okay. Now the Liberty Amendments, they say we're doing it for to reduce the strength of the federal government. And they don't want to do it because they want to leave it open. There's a lot of things that need to the Annapolis Convention was kind of the same way. It went in for commerce, and then it realized that commerce is affected by so many things. They wrote a recommendation to all the states, hey, we got to get together because there's so many things wrong. We need to discuss other items for the posterity of this country. So I look at it. Could they do that? Could they be rogue? Yeah, they could. Right now they're rogue. That's what I keep getting back to. Every day we lose our country more and more and more. This is at least a stop. Maybe if 16 or 20 got together and said we're going to limit Congress and we're going to cut their balls off and stuff, and we're not going to let them do certain things, and the same with the Supreme Court. Excuse me for saying that.
Senator from Iowa.
Yeah. But maybe if they did, maybe then Congress would wake up and realize that their power comes from the people, not from the other groups that are influencing.
So what you're saying is that the threat of a constitutional convention is also a powerful.
The threat of nullification is nothing. I mean,
well, actually, while we were talking, I thought of a great example of nullification that actually went as far. The state of New Hampshire, live free or die, back in the 70s or 80s, when they were told that that their citizens had to have motorcycle helmets, or lose highway money. New Hampshire went like that, and they said, take our highway fund, that's fine.
Mm-hmm. And what they do now is they pay for it themselves.
That talks about getting rid of the money. But anyways,
That's a fund on the dike, though.
yes, granted, there are many.
These extreme times call for extreme
Okay,
measures. I don't.
but again, we'll open up. I want to make one more quick statement. We all agree, though, that we all need to be active. We all need to educate. Regardless of whether you're for a constitutional convention or against it, we still need to be. Article 5 convention. Okay, I'm sorry. I think actually when I started writing the email to the two of you, I was saying, am I using a term that's not going to be caustic? I guess an Article 5 convention.
Right there.
Regardless of whether we're doing that or not, we all still need to continue to be politically active, involved in discussing these things, educating our populace, and taking back control of our government, whether it's doing Article 5 or whether it's retaking control of our legislators and our elected officials. Okay, again, opening it up to questions. I'll start over here and then work my way over.
Thanks, Pat. I'll make it brief. I just want to direct this question to Tom, an advocate for the Article 5 convention. I just want to focus everybody's ideas on the on delegate selection. This is a very critical part of how conventions are run and the outcomes of elections. And usually conventions are decided before they begin, and we know this because professional manipulators run those things. They get in at the very beginning, they pick the delegates, they disqualify certain delegates that have certain ideas or whatever. And I just want to know, as an advocate for the Article 5 convention, how do you, what sort of safeguards do you see being put in place to prevent that delegate selection from becoming corrupted?
I think they'll be part of it will be corrupted. We're human beings. But if we've got 50 states, I'm going to trust that the majority of the states will have a good delegation. Will do good delegates. Massachusetts is going to get delegates to do what they believe the people of Massachusetts want. Same with New Hampshire, this and that. There's a difference, though, between a convention that might screw one political opponent from another with votes versus a convention where you're actually going to try to discuss and hammer out an idea to improve the country. There's a big difference. You know, for like the thing that happened with the governor's race. There's a big difference between that and the other. Can it get corrupted? Yes, it can. Is it corrupted now? Yes, it is. Is there any way we can elect enough people in the next 20 years so that they don't get corrupted and they can change it? No, there's not. So we have to do something different. This is the exact reason George Mason insisted that this go in, is dire times, whatever. Yeah, I don't believe you're rolling the dice though. Because being in a lot of the different states, they're a little bit different than Massachusetts and California. In fact, I'd like to sell California and adopt Puerto Rico. We'd still keep the 50 stars. That's just...
Or actually even split it into 5 separate states. I've heard that being proposed.
No. The only other thing is to take on Mexico with their 26 states, and then we'd have 76 stars. So there's different thoughts on that.
Okay.
Drop the bomb on that shit hole.
The one caveat, and the one disagreement I have with your argument, Tom, about the 14 states rejecting ratification, and to back Catherine a little bit, that's great if they're only proposing amendments. Well, in 1787, they proposed to, let's fix the Articles of Confederation. What they ended up doing was tossing the whole thing out and writing the Constitution, passed as prologue.
But is that binary
Let me
alternative?
finish my question. So, if we have a runaway convention and they suddenly say, to heck with it, we're throwing the Constitution out, we're going to rewrite it. You said the Ford, what was it, Catherine? The Ford Rockefeller Foundation? They've already got one.
The Constitution
And
for
I
the New
spoke
States
to,
of America.
I spoke to Hal Shurtleff, many other people on my show. All these organizations, all these PACs, all these groups, that's great. They're all proposing amendments. They're all proposing an Article 5, a Convention of States, whatever you want to call it. They're groups, they're organizations, they're not actual legislators, which is what is specifically said in the Constitution. So let's say it all gets thrown out. I think you posit from the idea that, well, under the Constitution, 14 states, if they reject it, then it's, well, no, that won't apply anymore because they threw the Constitution away.
Right.
Yes, and they already have. They already have thrown the Constitution away. At some point, the American people are going to understand they've already thrown it away.
I'm talking about
This thing-
after the
this-
fact. Let's say that happened.
This thing doesn't say change. This thing doesn't say change. This thing says amendments.
I understand that.
So an
Let's just
amendment is
stop them.
different from stopping from starting over with the new Constitution.
Catherine.
In so many times and places, I find that the best analogies come from Professor Tolkien and The Lord of the Rings. Talking about Gondor, and even at the end of its strength, is still very strong, and Gondor stands. We are at the very edge of the limits of the Constitution, yet still it holds on, and if we look outside of Massachusetts, we will see state after state after state starting to fight back. We are not yet at the place where the only thing to do is to take the chance of losing everything by trying to hold an Article 5 convention, because that is the chance we take. Slow, steady work to retrieve a very, very degraded Constitution, or the chance of losing it completely. And I ask you to all go and read the Constitution for the New States of America and the Constitution written by the Communist Party, and see if you can sleep that night, and see if you're willing to take that chance. They are written.
But
they
in
are
the Lord
ready to be proposed.
But
I'm sorry, Catherine. They put the Article 5 in for the reason that we see today, where we are so corrupt in Washington,
Actually, no,
D.C.
they did not.
They put that.
George Mason was a dissenter. He was one single person. They
No.
put in the state call as a placation to him, only for him, and he still refused to sign.
The Virginia plan by Edwin Randolph actually had just the states making amendments.
Yeah, but that's not
That
what they
got
decided
changed.
to put in.
That got changed and modified. Then it got changed and modified again, and then George Mason came back. If I do not believe that they put something in willy-nilly just to get a vote, they didn't need the vote, because the vote to make this document the law of the land had to come out of 13 legislatures setting up a ratification
It
process.
wasn't to get his vote. It was to assuage his concerns, and it did not go far enough, so he refused to sign.
Can I just say,
Sorry?
death to Sauron.
I'm sorry? What?
Death to Sauron.
Death to Sauron.
well, being the second Tolkien aficionado in the head, I had just had to mention that with The Lord of the Rings, they did not choose the incremental method. They chose to take the ring to Mount Doom, and considering how risky a process that was.
They also chose the slow and dangerous route rather than trying to make a dash to the uttermost place.
Safe route was to hide the ring somewhere. All right, can I mention briefly the thing that I really wanted to, which is, because I want to call attention to it. Tomorrow will be an inflection point that will highlight the problems that we are discussing. I'm not sure it's directly related to constitutional issues, but it certainly is in the theme of what Mark Levin's going. We elected a Republican Congress, and even before it took its office, our Speaker of the House, saying whatever you want to say, whether you're for or against the amnesty bill and funding, the process obviously stunk. They passed an enormous pork-laden, lobbyist-controlled spending bill and took the power out of the subsequent Congress for at least a year. And as a result, there was a revolt, and now Representative Louis Gohmert is going to challenge the Speaker. This is like a Cantor moment. Even if he gets close, okay, it's an earth-shattering event. If he can keep Boehner from getting elected tomorrow, even if he ultimately gets elected, it's an earthquake in Washington.
Which I included in my newsletter. I called the congressman on there. It's something that we need to send Washington messages.
It may be the most important event of 2015.
Which congressman from Massachusetts?
I'm sure all of them are going to vote against Boehner.
They're lost causes.
No, they will actually, they're Democrats, so they'll actually vote for the
First of all, I'd suggest that you guys quit calling out things because it's disrupting the thing. But anyway, if not an Article 5 or a con, whatever you want to suggest, all I hear is why we can't do it. So give me some information, what we can do to stop this nonsense. All you guys are doing is telling me what we can't do. Okay, and we're telling me why Article 5 isn't going to work and what we're so scared of and all these nitwits. There's a lot of nitwits, but tell me what we can do different to stop it. If we sit here and keep saying we can't stop it, we can't do this, we can't do that, we can't try under the Constitution, why the hell are we even here tonight? Answer me that.
You want an answer to that?
Yeah.
The answer is quite simple.
Hold on.
Let's get Catherine.
Let our panel answer.
Okay. I was asked to present the arguments against the Constitutional Convention, which is what I have done. If you want now to say, what can we do instead, the first thing we must do is spread an understanding of the Constitution to everyone we can come in contact with and start retaking our towns, our counties, our states, and while we are doing that, the Campaign for Liberty people tell you in their training school that politicians respond best to discomfort. So you keep up the calls, the emails, the faxes to the ledges vermin in Washington, D.C., because they do respond to that, not as strongly as we would like, but they do respond to that. And by doing that, we prevent further degradation or slow down the rate of further degradation while we are establishing our footholds and bulwarks in our towns, cities, counties, and states. When we have our towns, cities, counties, and states full of people who understand the Constitution and support it, D.C. will topple like dominoes. But it's not going to be fast, and it's not going to be easy, and for a long time we're going to feel like we're spitting in the wind. But look at yourselves. 6 years ago, did you think you would be spending a cold night in a bar listening to a debate on constitutional issues? If someone had told you that 6 or 8 years ago, for most people in this room, you would have said to them, you got to lay off that stuff. It's doing really bad things to your head.
Yeah, but could you
Already there's the change.
Can you imagine how nice it would be that we could get the 20 and 30-year-olds that have been polluted? We've got some of them, but there's a lot more percentage of those than us, and yet the educational system. I contend that the Article 5 use a Article 5 amendment process for the Constitution as a great training tool, learning, education, this and that. It's not going to happen overnight. You'd be lucky if it happens within 5 years. But that's every night education, different ideas, people talking. It's a positive step. Hey, I was on MSNBC. It was one of my proudest moments being on Rachel Maddow.
Oh my God, no.
Are you kidding me? I mean, I put that video up all the time. Yeah, no, you can't.
Do it again.
But covered by Levin and covered by Limbaugh and covered by Fox News and covered by all of the different blogs and this and that. It is important. We are, in most countries, if you had a discussion like this, they would shoot the opposition. We haven't got there yet, I'm afraid we might be closer than we think, though.
So there was another comment that somebody had back there that was...
Right here. You want to...
Yes. Oh, thank you. One thing that I've been hearing, and we've listened, constitutional convention, nullification, things that may or may not work. Each have their inherent risks. Nullification, as we've seen, has been very hit and miss. Might we, as people who are interested in advocating for smaller federal government especially, have our efforts better expended by simply advocating for things that would actually make government smaller, like repealing the 16th Amendment, passing some of the things that downsize DC push, like write the laws and read the bills, and other legislation that would enforce accountability upon Congress. And like I think it was you that had said, Mr. Weaver, we might not be able to stop everything, but we can slow it down enough so we might even be able to reverse it a little bit. Instead of doing that, wouldn't that be the better way to expend our energies?
That's an Article 5 Convention of the States, what you just described. Because you're not going to repeal some of these things unless you go above, because the Supreme Court has held many of these things to be constitutional.
Yes.
To continue on his point, we've heard very few actual amendments being proposed here. So far I've heard the balanced budget amendment, which is a hoax. It's just going to give an excuse to raise taxes. I've heard term limits, which might make a difference if we're lucky. I mean, I want to, Jay Rockefeller and all these other guys are finally getting out. But I mean, if we actually had something hardcore conservative, we have over 200 years of laws to repeal. If somehow we got a slam dunk at your Article 5 convention, and we could dissolve the federal government completely and go back to the Articles of Confederation, which the vast majority of Americans in the 1780s supported, would you support that?
We almost lost our nation.
No, most Americans supported it in the 1780s.
I know, just like most Americans today support Congress.
Well, back then we were a lot, sadly we were a lot smarter.
Same type of thing.
We would have 50 different currencies, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Actually, some people like and they've gone into
We're in
Bitcoin.
Massachusetts. Don't expect us to come out on that.
Better than the Fed.
Thank you, everybody, very much. Actually, I'd like to have maybe a closing, and I didn't propose closing statements, but if there's anything else that either one of you'd like to say, maybe just like 1 or 2 minutes at the most. But, again, first of all, I'd like to thank them very much. Everybody, let's give everybody a round of applause. Because everybody realizes that regardless of what we're going to do, whether there's an Article 5 convention or not, we all still have to remain active. We have to be getting involved in our government. We have to be taking it back. We have to be educating everybody. So, regardless of which process is put in place, our attention to the problems in this country is absolutely mandatory, because if not, we're going to be leaving a country that's worse than what we inherited, and that is something that we cannot do. So, thank you again very much, everyone, for coming. Catherine?
For closing statements, I will simply say, whichever side of the Article 5 convention you're on, I would ask, please, take one of my cards, email me, let me send you the package of information. Read it for yourself. Read my annotations. Look things up for yourself. Satisfy yourself that you really understand the issues and the options, so that whichever side you decide that you really want to support, you will know why. And you will know the arguments against as well as the arguments for. And if anyone wants to continue a constitutional discussion, my next class is a week from tonight.
Thank you, Catherine.
It seems to me that what is hurting this country right now is spending, regulations, the fact that we no longer have 50 republics, and the federal leviathan, the bureaucracies. One of the geniuses in the Constitution was it made sure that every state was its own republic. So that means that we could laugh about Texas people. We can laugh about only needing a toothbrush that's real small to brush the teeth in Arkansas. We can not worry about the people in Alabama. We can joke about this people, but basically, if we ever got fed up with our little republic of Massachusetts, we could go someplace else. That's got to change. Perhaps maybe we do some nullification. If that can work in some cases, fine. But I think part of the educational process is the Article 5 Convention. I believe what the founders and framers did. They put it in there for a reason. And the reason was when the corruption of government gets so big that they don't listen to you, the people have to come together. Remember, this whole document starts with we the people. It doesn't start with we the states. And so however you want to, maybe it's always a couple of different ways to do something. When I painted my house, I used a brush and I used a spray painter. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough money to pay my son. But, you know, there's different ways, and we have to go that. We do have a serious problem. This country is changing before our eyes. Those of you that are young, you think it's the greatest country in the world. And that gives credence to the fact that it was the greatest country in the world, because we have so far to go before we're like England or France or all those others. That's right, we still are. But we've lost so much. So, that's it. Remember, we're an exceptional country. Not because we're better than the Germans or the English or the French. Well, the French, yes, we are. But it's not because of that. We're the greatest country. We're an exceptional nation because the Constitution was developed and signed to protect our freedom and our rights. And it's the first time in history that a government came together to care more about the rights of people than any place else. No other country in this world's like that. So we as a group need to go. I support the Article 5 Convention of the States to amend the Constitution. I believe that that's the best way to educate people. If you want to throw in some nullification, I'll work with you on education, but we've got to do an all-front attack. Anyway, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Again, if you want more information, Catherine said she'd share it with you. Tom, do you have some information that you could share? Or
yeah,
the Constitution. Okay. Or then you can talk to Hal, and John would be a good contact. John Locke would be a contact for the Convention of the States. Thank you very much, everybody.
I don't have that here.
Oh, okay.